Welcome to another devlog for my currently unnamed strategy game set in Japan. I've mainly been working on fixing bugs and adding UI to make the game easier to understand in an effort to push for a minimum viable demo. I started out by fixing some bugs that have popped up with the tile and faction deselection. I have this move confirmation UI that comes up when you select a tile for your army to move towards. This is to stop you from misclicking and sending your army to the wrong location, but it only goes away if you specifically hit the cancel button. The other bug happens when you click the faction's capital icon. The entire faction is highlighted, but it will only revert if the capital button is pressed again. Okay, now both of these issues are solved. When you click away, either in the middle of the ocean or on another tile, these UI screens will disappear. Since I'm developing for a phone screen to limit the scope of the game, I need the UI to be as space efficient as possible. One of the cool, subtle visuals in CK3 is the rank indication on flags and characters. For a Count, Duke, King, and Emperor, the color and visual flair gets more and more elaborate, letting you clearly distinguish between the different ranks. So I added this to my game too. There are 3 power levels with different graphics. Right now this is just connected to the number of territories a faction controls, but in the future I may augment it to include other faction metrics as well. Even with this faction flag change, one of the things I felt was sorely missing was a better way to understand how well you were doing compared to the other players in the game. Since the territory size is not symmetrical across the map, a smaller looking faction could be deceptively stronger than a faction covering more area. To fix this, I want to create a faction selection UI that will let you easily compare faction stats with each other. This is also a good place to add in a character list, since I also want to add them to the game later too. Okay, I sketched out this prototype. I wanted to keep it somewhat similar to the tile selection UI, so I followed a similar structure. The title of the faction is at the top of the screen with the faction flag and faction leader hugging it. Then you have the resources of the faction below that, and then 2 buttons for the 2 different overview screens, one for the faction list and the other for the character list. Overall, this is going to be a big change because I'll need to refactor the UI code for it to work with more UI windows. The way the UI is set up now is with the UI singleton game object. This allows me to easily update the UI from anywhere. However, since the tile UI has been the only UI I'm dealing with, the main UI has basically just become the tile UI. So I'll need to pull out the tile UI code into its own thing, create a faction UI, and then use the main UI as a communication node to link them together. I got through separating all the UI code yesterday, and today I just linked up different parts of the faction screen to the new code in Unity. Part of the overview for a faction is knowing where its borders are, so I'm thinking it would be really cool to have the camera zoom out to show an entire faction's territory when it's selected. And here it is. So now when a faction is selected, the camera will zoom out to show all the faction's territory. I also made it so you could select other factions and jump around to them by selecting them in the faction list. This way you can quickly zoom to other factions without needing to swipe around and search for them on the map. The next thing I had to fix was an issue with the touch controls, where the map would get moved as you swipe through the faction list. This was actually on purpose, since it was a solution to stop some jumpy map movement caused when your finger would swipe over some UI. I looked over the touch controls again and fixed a bug I missed from before where I was not tracking finger movement properly over UI elements. This fixed the map scrolling behind the list and also removed the jumpiness from before.
Yes!
Lastly, I made sure the different subscreens appear and disappear properly so they don't get in the way of one another. Today, I fixed the faction resource bar so it would refresh correctly with the faction UI. To make the faction list more useful, I wanted to have the selected faction at the top of the list, with all the other factions listed underneath, sorted from most powerful to least powerful. This way you can easily see how the selected faction compares to the most powerful factions. Okay, it's finally done. I was having a ton of trouble, because even though the list would be sorted fine initially, it would seemingly get worse and worse over time, eventually not sorting correctly at all. But I finally realized my issues. One was comparing dead factions to living factions, causing sorting to just pause at weird cutoffs, and the other was from not clearing old data from unused list items, causing the selected faction to be invisible at the top of the list. With these sorted out, the faction UI is feeling done for now. Next, I decided to move on to improving the armies, since I noticed they could use some visibility improvements while playtesting. I first want to do this by adding an indication for what state the army is currently in. There are 3 basic states an army could be in: stationary, moving, or in battle. I had to make these really small icons for the different states, which was pretty fun to figure out. There's really not much room to work with at that scale, and any one pixel can change the entire feel of the icon. While testing this feature, I noticed that some of the army states would not change correctly, which led me to finding and figuring out two other bugs. One where my coroutines were not stopping when I thought they were, and the other where an army would randomly attack itself. I'd been completely stumped by the army attacking itself bug, and I did not even know about the coroutine bug, so it was really great to figure these out from adding a new feature. Another place I wanted to add visibility was unit combat. Since combat is based on a hit chance, there are times when units are swinging at one another and you can't tell if anything is actually happening or not, which makes it kind of boring. I have been following the development of a cool card drifting game on Twitter, and it gave me inspiration for having the units shoot out a little indicator letting you know whether or not they hit their target. After adding this, combat got way more interesting because it gave you something to anticipate. With this, you could also take in the battle at a higher level and determine if it was swinging in one direction or another. I did get some feedback that I should replace the letters with an icon or particles, so I plan to look into that in the future as well. I then added some visibility improvements to the map. I added line renderers to show map connections between tiles over the water, so it's easier to understand how they are connected, and then I added some bobbing animation to the faction capital icons so they don't blend into the background so easily. And finally, I moved on to some more functional bugs. When armies move, it is actually just the flag moving with the units following along at a slower speed, so they don't continuously catch up and go from stop to go to stop again. This works most of the time, but if the army is traveling a long distance, such as in the northern territories, the army flag can get way ahead of the army and cause some weird looking behavior, where the flag looks like it does not have an army. Luckily, I had an epiphany and figured out all I needed to do was stop normalizing the unit speed after a certain distance from the flag. This makes the units move faster as they get further and further away from the flag, keeping them at a steady distance instead of lagging behind, no matter how far they are traveling. I have been steadily getting the game more and more consistent at the different speed settings. I figured out today I was not applying the speed increase to the attack animation delays and the arrow gravity. After fixing this, the game feels way more consistent at different speeds, so hopefully that's the last of it. Hey, you actually made it to the end of the video. How about hitting that like button? I still have a bunch of things to implement before making a demo, but I'm planning to have something to play by the next devlog. So stay tuned and subscribe for more.